Good afternoon. My name is PJ, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Oregon Employment Department for our unemployment insurance temporary rural listening session for Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. We will start in a few minutes. We will be starting in a few minutes. This listening session is being simultaneously interpreted in Spanish, Russian, Vietnamese, and Cantonese. If you would like to have this webinar simultaneously interpreted, please follow the instructions on the slide. You're going to click the interpretation box on the bottom Zoom bar. You're going to choose your preferred language. The presenter's voice will be lowered while the interpreter speaks over it. You can choose to mute the presenter if you want. These instructions will be put in the chat box. Please note that we cannot look into or resolve any person's claim or business's issue in this public forum, and it is not safe to put your personal information, like a social security number or business identification number, in the chat or question boxes in this public recorded webinar that will be posted online. Now, I'd like to turn this listening session over to Lindsay Leahy, the Unemployment Insurance Director, the Unemployment Insurance Division Director for the Oregon Employment Department. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Thanks, PJ, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's listening session. During the next 90 minutes, we would like to gather your perspectives on the updates to the availability for work eligibility requirement for unemployment insurance benefits as we explore the possibility of making those changes permanent. The purpose of unemployment insurance benefits is to provide a temporary, partial wage replacement to individuals who are out of work through no fault of their own. These benefits help keep individuals in their local communities, create an available workforce for local businesses, and provide economic stability to local economies. We saw this in action during the pandemic, where from March 15th of 2020 through September 20th of 2021, unemployment benefits provided an infusion of over $10.9 billion into Oregon's economy. Unemployment insurance benefits are paid weekly based on the individual meeting all eligibility criteria, including being able to work, being available for work, and actively seeking work for each week that an individual claims benefits. The temporary amendment to Oregon Administrative Rule 471-030-0036 modifies the availability for work requirement. so that workers who are seeking shift-based work only need to be available for at least one shift instead of a minimum of 2 shifts, which was the requirement under the old rule. For work that isn't shift-based, workers need to be available for full-time work. In most occupations, this is 40 hours per week. However, for some occupations, full-time work is fewer than 40 hours. Under the old rule, a worker needed to be available for work during all the usual days and hours of the week customary for the type of work they were seeking, which, depending on the industry, could add up to that individual needing to be available for more than 40 hours in any given week. We have notified people receiving benefits about the rule amendment, and our online temporary eligibility rule FAQ has more information. To find the FAQ, go to unemployment.oregon.gov, click on Frequently Asked Questions, and then scroll down to Temporary Availability Rule Change. If you'd like to read the rule itself, please visit oregon.gov/employ/agency and click on OED Administrative Rules. Now, to help explain the changes, I'm going to go over 3 scenarios that show the difference this new rule will make for people receiving unemployment insurance benefits. Please remember that unemployment insurance eligibility issues are reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and these scenarios are just examples. If you have questions about your specific availability requirements or possible issues, please use our Contact Us form at unemployment.oregon.gov or call 1-877-345-3484. So in scenario 1, your occupation, the type of work you are seeking, has day, evening, and night shifts, but you have limited childcare options in your area. Previously, you had to be available for 2 of those shifts to be eligible for benefits. So the limited childcare during, for example, the day shift and evening shifts would have caused availability issues. Now, for this scenario, you only need to be available for the night shift, so that same conflict wouldn't be an issue. For scenario 2, you're looking for work in an industry that is open 24 hours. Under the old rule, you had to be available for all the hours and days of the week to be eligible for benefits. Under the new rule, you only have to be available for at least 40 hours a week unless full-time work for your occupation or the occupation you usually seek is defined as less than 40 hours a week. Under scenario 3, the normal hours for your customary occupation are worked from 6 o'clock a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m., 7 days a week. Previously, you had to be available for all of those hours and days. However, you take the bus to work, and the bus doesn't run on Sundays in your area. In this scenario, if you didn't have another form of transportation to get to work on Sundays, you would not be eligible for benefits. Under the new rule, you only need to be available for at least 40 hours per week, unless full-time work for your occupation is defined as less than 40 hours. So the lack of transportation on Sundays in this example is no longer an availability issue as long as you are available for full-time work. I'll wrap up by saying, as a result of the pandemic, the labor market today looks and acts differently from what it did prior to March of last year. And the Employment Department wants to help keep step with those changes by updating our eligibility requirements while continuing to remain within the federal framework for the program. And we believe this change helps us do that. I look forward to hearing your comments and questions, and I thank you for your participation today. And with that, I'll hand it back over to PJ.
Thank you, Lindsay. Now we're going to move on to the details about today's listening session. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post it to our webinar page after this listening session has ended. If you would like to make a comment or question, please raise your hand, and I will call on people in the order hands are raised. Since this listening session is limited to 90 minutes, you will have up to 5 minutes to comment. We reserve the right to reduce the comment time to up to 2 minutes if a large number of people would like to comment. That way, we can be sure everyone has an opportunity to be heard. If there is limited participation, we may end the webinar early if there are no more questions or comments. Remember, do not put personal or business information in the Q&A or chat box. For help with a claim issue, please use our online Contact Us form at unemployment.oregon.gov or call 1-877-345-3484. If you do not want to speak, but you have a question you would like answered, please put your question in the Q&A box. Again, please remember that we cannot answer questions specific to your claim. Do not enter your Social Security number or your business identification number in the Q&A or chat boxes, as this recording will be available online. If you have technical difficulties or are unable to ask your question, please send an email to oed_communications@employ.oregon.gov and we will assist you. Our unemployment insurance listening session panelists are available to answer your questions. They are Lisa, Tim, and Zulamar. If you have a question in Spanish, please type it into the chat or raise your hand so that Zulamar may translate. If you have a question in another language, please type it into the chat and we'll follow up with you after the webinar. We are now beginning the comment and question section. I will call on you in order. Please make sure you state your full name and tell us if you are making a comment or asking a question. If you are joining us by phone, please be sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself when you are called on so you can comment. If technical difficulties prevent you from asking your question or making a comment, please email oed_communications@employ.oregon.gov. And a final reminder, we cannot look into or resolve any person's claim in this public forum, and it is not safe to put your personal information in the chat or question boxes in this public recorded webinar that will be posted online. I will now pause to give people time to raise their hands. Remember, use our Contact Us online form or call us for help with your personal or business claim issues. And as you're raising your hand, please know that what I will do is I will be having the scenarios. I'll be going over them again in all the different languages. So please make sure that you raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, we have a couple questions, so I'm going to give it another minute in case others want to ask a question too. Okay, so the first question is, or comment is from Paloma Sparks. Paloma, please let us know if you're asking a question or if you have a comment. Go ahead.
I have a question. Will employees be notified when they file their initial claim, or that they'll have to identify their schedule limitations?
Okay. And so who would like to answer that question?
So I can answer that question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paloma, for the question. We notify claimants of their eligibility, the requirements for claiming when they file, and monetary rules and things like that. Then they are required to, most of them are required to come in and do orientation activities. And during that session with one of our representatives, they'll evaluate the type of work they're seeking, what their skills are, what their experience is, and what their availability, any barriers that they have, or what's typical for their industry within their particular locality. And they'll be given an advisement at that time of what their specific eligibility requirements are. And then they'll be told, if they change, they need to let us know so that we can modify the requirement.
Paloma, do you have a follow-up or a comment?
Not right now.
Thank you. Next, we have Anthony Smith.
Yeah, this is Anthony Smith. I'm the Oregon State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I have a three-part question for you. First off, how many more Oregonians are expected to be eligible for benefits under the temporary rule? How much will the temporary rule cost the trust fund? And will this impact employer rates going forward?
So I can take a stab at answering that. Some of those questions we don't know the answers to, which is why we are doing some of these sessions and why the rule is temporary while we are learning to, while we are assessing the impact to the trust fund. And while we're assessing how many additional customers will get benefits. So the long and the short of it is we are still gathering the data on that. As far as how it will impact individual employer tax rates, as experience rating has been paused right now, the impact to the employer tax rates would be on the side of what tax table we are now in as a result of the fund adequacy ratio analysis, which is an overly complicated way of saying we look at how much is in the trust fund and we estimate how much is going to be needed to pay benefits. And at that point, we determine what tax table we're in. As an employer's experience rating is frozen, they will fall at the same spot that they would, but it would depend on what tax table we're in. Please let me know if you have a follow-up question, because that was an overly complicated answer.
No, that's a perfectly fine answer. And I'm tracking with you on the impacts, the employer experience ratings being frozen due to House Bill 3389 that passed earlier this year. And so I guess the key question then is the universe of people that would be eligible for benefits that aren't eligible today, is that universe big enough to warrant a schedule increase? And it sounds, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're gathering that information, but you don't have an answer yet.
That is correct. But you said it much better than I did.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. Do you have anything else that you'd like to ask a question about or comment?
I have a couple of other questions too, but they're on another subject. I'm happy to wait to give somebody else an opportunity to answer to ask a question. Or I can go down.
So you can do it right now.
Okay. The other question that I have relates to the temporary nature of the rule that's in effect right now and the possibility of a permanent rule. My understanding is that the The temporary rule was really prompted by the circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. My question is, what's the impetus for considering a permanent rule? I know sometimes in this process, temporary rules are only in effect for so long, and we're not sure how long the pandemic will persist. I understand that if the consideration for a permanent rule is to essentially extend a temporary rule. Well, maybe you could comment on that first, and then is the expectation that if a permanent rule was to go forward, that permanent rule would be repealed once the pandemic was over?
I can take that one. So even prior to the pandemic, we were looking at our availability rules. They've been in place for a long time, and the nature of work has changed in the past 10 years. And so that was really highlighted during the pandemic. So there's a lot more availability to work remotely. There's more flexible shift options and things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we're not imposing barriers to return, right? Imposing barriers that aren't really barriers to returning to work, if that makes sense, saying that you need to be required to be available during hours that actually claimants in particular areas actually they can be available less and still return to work in the same amount of time. And so this was a great opportunity, both with the passing of the House bill and also just kind of evaluating what happened during the pandemic, to do this now. And we also wanted to make sure that some claimants still have they're still caring for those with COVID and or have child care shortages within their local areas. So we're monitoring that as well. So the intent of the rule, like I said, as we gather the data, we'll be able to look at it and say, okay, this is doing what it's supposed to do. Is that because it's pandemic related, or is it just a general overall there's more flexibility? So that's really what goes into, is this good idea? Is it a good idea? After hearing all these listening sessions and everybody's feedback, having time for claimants to go through it and kind of looking at any trends. And then if it is, we will make that a permanent rule. If, the nature of COVID, which is unpredictable, changes and it's no longer a good idea to do this, or we get enough feedback that says, no, this is not doing what you intended it to do, then it wouldn't be permanent. So the permanent rule wouldn't be to extend, the 180-day limitation. It's more, we think that this would be a good permanent change to the availability rule, but we want to test it out first. So that's why we went temporary to begin with.
Quick follow-up to that, if I may.
Sure.
You just noted that you're collecting data and taking a look at that data to inform the permanent rule. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that you will have some sort of report or analysis available that you can share with stakeholders before adopting the permanent rule? I know that we'd be pretty interested in seeing that. Getting back to my original questions about, what's the impact on the trust fund, and how does this impact rate schedules going forward for the state?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And I don't think that we had thought of putting together a formal report. I know that we will be looking at it, and we are committed to continual transparency. So depending on the data sets, and if we get, it depends on what's available, what we find, and all of that. So possibly, but I don't want to commit to providing a formal report if in the end there's not a lot to report out of. I know just preliminarily, we haven't had a whole lot of adjustments that have been needed based on the availability rule, but that's just real, new and sort of just fresh data. So, but I don't have hard numbers to share.
That's fair. My final comment, and then I'll let somebody else talk, would be that at a minimum, I think it would be a good idea before a permanent rule were to be proposed, is to have the answer to, how many people are we talking about that would be eligible, that are not eligible currently. what's the impact to the trust fund and potentially how it could impact rates to employers.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are definitely data points that we will be looking at. And I appreciate the comment. And with the nature of the 180 days to do the temporary rule, we also don't want to have a gap. So there might be something where we promulgate, if the trend is going, hey, this is a good plan, a permanent rule, and then continue the evaluation period and then come back and then modify it, go back to the way it was or make other changes, after like a year or something like that. So as we go forward in the months, we'll be able to actually kind of look at what we're seeing, what trends, if we need more data, to your point. If there's not enough people that are going through it, then we might just not have enough to base the information on. And so might promulgate permanent or might not, and then, gather more data going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. So I want to remind people there are a couple different ways that you can comment. One, you can raise your hand and then you will be called on to either make a comment or ask a question. It's your choice. You also may put your comment or question in the chat box, so that way we can see the question and it can be answered. Also, for individuals who speak Spanish, you can put your question in the chat box in Spanish, and Zulumar will be able to review it and respond. So, and please note that what we are doing right now with our slides is we are scrolling through each scenario so people can get a better understanding of what this change will do. So again, if you have a comment or question, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. You can put it in the chat box. Okay, we have a question from Paloma Sparks. Go ahead, Paloma.
Thanks. I think there are some issues with how the rule is written. It's not terribly easy for folks to understand exactly what the division is doing. So I would urge, if at all possible, some language changes so it's a little bit easier to understand. I also would like to see language in there that employees need to have a reason why they're unavailable for certain shifts. And that isn't something that can be changed midstream throughout the time of their claim. So that would be my ask for items to see in the rule. I know that I've talked to a number of employers who've been pretty confused about what you're proposing to do with the rule, and I think some simpler and clearer language would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Paloma. A reminder, so Anthony Smith would like to make a comment or ask a question. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony Smith again for NFIB. To Paloma's point, just as an example of one of the things I found a little confusing in the rule text is, and I know this is clarified on the website, the FAQ, regarding 40 hours a week or one shift, and one shift means one shift per day. I'm looking at section 3, small c, capital B on page 2 of the rule. And it says during more than one shift, the individual must be available to work at least one shift during the week. And so I just think that that's an example of clarity where, this section of the rule talks about one shift per week, but the FAQ on the department's website talks about one shift per day. So yeah, I just wanted to echo Paloma's comment and and highlight at least one place that at least looks a little confusing.
Thank you, Anthony.
I was just going to say, thank you very much. We are always looking for feedback on areas that we can improve and clean up our rules to make them easier to understand. And when we have specific sections that people are pointing out to us, we really, truly appreciate it. So we can document that and get that language cleaned up and make it more easy to understand. That was not very good grammar. I apologize.
Anthony, do you have any follow-up comment from that?
No, clarity would be very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you. So I want to remind people that there are different ways that you can comment or ask about this rule. You can raise your hand. You also can put the question into the chat box and we will read it and we will answer the question. If you would like to have your question answered in Spanish, you could ask the question in Spanish in the box and Zulumar will be able to answer it. So I'll give some time here for people to ask their questions or make their comments. So a reminder again, you may make your comments or ask a question by raising your hand, and we will call on you in the order the hands are raised. If you would prefer, you also may put your comment or your question in the chat. And if you would prefer to have your question answered in Spanish, or you'd like to ask it in Spanish, you may put your question in Spanish in the chat box, and Zulumar will be able to respond. And a reminder that to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your hand and we will call on people in the order the hands are raised. You also may put your question or comment in the chat box and we will answer it. If you submit your question in Spanish, Zulumar will be able to provide an answer to you. So if you are just joining us, this is an opportunity for you to comment or ask a question. And so how you can do that is you can raise your hand and we will answer the questions in the order they are received or the comments. You also may put your comment or question in the chat box and we will respond. If you would like to have your comment or question asked in Spanish, you can put that in the chat box and I will be able to respond. And you will note that the slides are showing the different scenarios, and we have these slides available in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and simplified Chinese. So this way you'll be able to see what the scenarios are with this new proposed rule. Hello, we'd like to thank you for joining us and would like for you to know that we have two ways. We have two ways for you to comment or ask a question. The first is you can raise your hand and call on people in the order their hands were raised, and they can ask the question or they can make a comment. The second way is you can put your question or comment in the chat box. We will review it and we review it, we will speak it out loud, and then that will be answered. And also be aware that if you'd like, you can ask your question in Spanish, and Zulumar will be able to respond. A reminder that if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your hand and people will be called on in the order their hands were raised. You also have the option to put your comment or your question in the chat box, and it'll be read and a member of our team will be able to respond. Also, you may ask your question in Spanish in the chat box, and Zulimar will be happy to respond. Just so you know, we will end this listening session at 12:45 p.m. if there are no further comments or questions. So you can make a comment or question by raising your hand, and we will call on people in the order their hands are raised. You also may submit your comment or question through the chat bot. I'm sorry, I keep saying that, the chat box, and we will read the question and we'll respond. You also may submit your question in Spanish, and Zulimar will be able to read the question and respond. So again, at 12:45, we will end this listening session if there are no other comments and no other questions. Thank you. So we plan on ending this listening session in a minute if there are no further comments or questions. You may raise your hand to make a comment or ask a question. You may place it in our chat box. If you'd like to ask your question in Spanish, you may put your question in the chat box and Zulimar will respond. We're going to finish letting this scroll through the languages. Okay, so there are no other questions or comments. So this concludes our listening session comment period. There are additional listening sessions available, and those dates and times are a worker focus session, Tuesday, November 9th at 6 p.m., Wednesday, November 17th at 9 a.m. This listening session was recorded, and we will post it on the Employment Department's webinar page at unemployment.oregon.gov/webinars. Thank you for taking time to provide feedback and participating today. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.